There aren't many silver linings to COVID-19, but I can think of one big one. Over the past 6-8 months, scientists all over the globe have been pooling their data and working on the exact same problem at the exact same time. Think of the brain power devoted to the eradication of this virus. And yet, the virus is a wily shapeshifter, defying treatment, mutating, and keeping us all on our toes. But what's the one thing that we know can cut off COVID's long and toxic tentacles that have reached into every corner of the globe? Testing. Testing, testing, testing. But in some places, it's still so hard to get a test. Long lines, questionnaires, the dreaded nasal swab that roto-rooters your sinuses, and up to a week's wait for results. It's not testing, it's torture. But not at U of I. Within 6 weeks of being asked, U of I scientists got a fast, simple, accurate, inexpensive saliva test up and running. 6 weeks! Now they can test 20,000 people a day. They didn't break the mold, they annihilated it. And that's not even the half of it. Teams of scientists, business experts, and logistics wizards are working furiously to make the saliva test available to the rest of the state and the rest of the country. Today on Rising to the Challenge, how the University of Illinois is showing the rest of the world how it's done. Who knew your salivaries could be so salutary? I'm Gwen Macsai. Stay with us.
The mystery virus started here in the city of Wuhan. Chinese authorities pinpointing its source to this food market. Those infected are being treated in medical centres, suffering symptoms similar to pneumonia.
We're deeply concerned both by the alarming levels of spread and severity and by the alarming levels of inaction. We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
I think Americans should be prepared that they're going to have to hunker down significantly more than we as a country are doing.
Right now, we turn to alarming numbers in the coronavirus pandemic. Those numbers have set records.
The rising number of cases and hospitalizations in many areas are still mounting.
Coronavirus cases continue to climb. Separately, the CDC says it's possible that the number of infections in the U.S. could be 10 times higher than the confirmed case count.
The governor has been preaching the importance of mask usage for months, but that message is gaining urgency as the number of cases across the state continues to rise because of what was described today as people's complacency.
This is a make or break moment for Illinois.
I want to tell you about a feat of accomplishment. This feat required thousands of man-hours, groundbreaking discoveries, epic organization, a logistical quagmire, and radical thinking, all while the clock was tick, tick, ticking away. It all ended with a fast, accurate, inexpensive COVID-19 test that was discovered and scaled up to the tune of 20,000 tests a day. It all started with a half teaspoon of saliva, a rack held together with binder clips, and a tiger at the Bronx Zoo. But let's start at the beginning, shall we? Meet our leading man in this story, Martin Burke. We met Marty Burke on the first day of classes when there was an air of excitement about starting the new school year. The scientists and administrators knew even then that their approach to COVID testing and containment would have to be flexible and follow the data as the academic year got underway. That proved to be true, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But first things first. Now, Marty Burke is a lot of things. He's a professor of chemistry at the University of Illinois. He's the May and Ving Lee Professor for Chemical Innovation. He's an MD, PhD from Harvard, no less. But mostly, he's just a really nice guy whose enthusiasm for his work is absolutely infectious. With a literal spring in his step, he bounces around campus, smiling, happy to help wherever he's needed. And around here, he is needed a lot. We certainly needed him to explain how this whole super-fast saliva testing nova got off the ground. And to do that, my producer Libby and I met Marty Burke at one of the 20 testing sites, big white tents, all over the University of Illinois Urbana Champaign campus.
Yeah, so the design was with the tents to obviously have it very open to the air, also make them convenient so people could just literally on their way to class, just stop off, submit their saliva, keep going. Also from a safety perspective, it keeps it open. Everything's better outside.
Every student, staff, and faculty member is assigned 2 days a week that they must test. We followed Robin Kaler from the Public Affairs Department through the process.
Hello, how you doing today, ma'am?
I'm well, how are you today?
I'm great. Have you had anything to eat, drink, smoke, or chew in the last hour?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Do you have your university card with you? So if you can swipe that for me, barcode facing you, please. Perfect.
After a quick ID check, a label is then stuck onto a plastic vial, and Robin takes it to a specially marked spot where she quietly dribbles saliva into the vial, just half a teaspoon. Then she screws the top onto the vial and places it in a rack. No swabs, no reagents, no pouring things in, taking things out, not even capping and uncapping, which is one reason the test results come back so quickly.
The beauty is as soon as all that gets filled, a golf cart will drive that over to the veterinary diagnostic lab, and then the entire rack actually goes into a hot water bath. That inactivates the virus, so thereby protects the workers in the lab, but also it cracks the virus open and exposes its RNA, and that allows us to skip all the supply chain bottlenecks that were a problem for the other tests. So now you don't need,
I know what you're thinking. The veterinary diagnostic lab? Patience grasshopper. We'll get to that in a second. Also, just a side note here, the rack that holds the test tube samples had to be specially designed to fit directly into the PCR machine that detects the virus. Enter the world-renowned engineering school that solved the problem overnight by taking commercial racks and putting them together with binder clips. Sometimes the MacGyver way is the best way. The whole endeavor started back in March, when colleges and universities all over the country closed their doors, sent students home, and went online. That's when Marty Burke was asked to help lead a team to find the fastest, safest way to open back up in August, which was only 5 short months away. Tall order. But the school threw everything they had at it.
I mean, from the beginning, they told us just get it done and empowered us with resources from every angle. You know, human resources, financial resources, space, pretty much everything we asked for, we were, was made available to us. And it's just been a tremendous team effort.
And he's not kidding. 7 task forces were formed. Hundreds of people contributed. And the thing about Marty Burke is that he wants to tell you about every single one of them.
So Craig Wagenknecht, who is in the Vice Chancellor's office, was just amazing in terms of the logistics.
Really, he's like the quarterback everybody wants on their team.
So Tim Phan, who is a professor in veterinary medicine, led this charge, and it was kind of his
because
vision to
even when he throws the touchdown pass and wins the game, he credits everyone else by name.
Robin Holland, who is the extraordinary individual who really helped get
He's still going.
Dean Rashid Bashir has just been amazing. I mean, every time we ask for something, somebody jumps in and helps us.
Back to our story. We left off when the University of Illinois Chemistry Department, led by Paul Hergenrother, had devised an ingenious, easy saliva COVID test. Check. But to be fast and inexpensive, you have to have a diagnostic lab on site. That's where the tiger comes in. I told you it would. Again, Marty Burke.
This is a great story. So you may have heard back in February, there was a tiger at the Bronx Zoo that was diagnosed with COVID-19. That happened here. So the sample was sent from New York to the veterinary diagnostic lab, and Lei Wang, who is one of the faculty members here, who's a world leader in animal coronaviruses, So he developed a COVID test for tigers and actually diagnosed the tiger at the Bronx Zoo. And so then when we realized we were going to need to build our own testing facility, we looked at lots of different options, and one of the ones that rose to the top very quickly was, could we convert our veterinary diagnostic lab into a human COVID-19 testing facility?
And the answer was yes, they could, and yes, they did. At this stage, they have the test and the lab, but they also needed to set up testing sites all over campus, 20 sites. So the events team, the people that plan graduations and all the other big events, took over logistics. Check. But they also needed massive amounts of data to be collected and modeled. That's where the computer guys come in. Check. But they also needed an app to keep track of all the test results and health information. Enter the IT people. And you can't get into any building on campus without showing your app to a wellness support associate, who's kind of like a student bouncer, so you need lots of those. Done and done. Are you exhausted yet? Because I am, and I'm only telling the story. But Marty Burke, not surprisingly, is brimming with energy.
We were at about 1.5% in early July in terms of our positivity rate. And now simply by that point, voluntarily, people coming and getting tested frequently over the summer, we watched it fall from 1.5 to drop below 0.2. We were able to almost eliminate coronavirus from UIUC campus.
But don't mistake Marty Burke's enthusiasm for naivete. That it isn't.
And so we've been modeling this very closely. We know there's going to be a bump when the students return. This isn't a surprise. This isn't a crisis. It's just math. But our modeling also predicts that if we test them fast and frequently, twice per week, which is now what the modeling ended up telling us that we had to do, it should come back down again. And so that's what we're really hopeful for, and we're all locking arms, and the next 2 to 3 weeks are going to be absolutely critical. Everyone has to do their part, but if we do that and we can keep the testing going, the modeling tells us we're going to get it right back down.
Pretty much everyone we spoke to felt that if the University of Illinois can't do it, no one can. And there's no question that even if the numbers come back down and stay down, the work is far from over. The university doesn't just want to keep its doors open, although that is the number one priority. It had plans in place all along to replicate all of its work to help the rest of Champaign, the rest of Illinois, and the rest of the country. More on that coming up. These are no small plans. Already, they're rolling out a mobile testing unit, which is basically a lab on a truck that can test 10,000 people a day wherever it goes. They also have plans for pop-up testing where it's needed, with more projects in the hopper.
So we like to say this is 2020, not 1918. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to go on offense. Enough of this. And so by pulling everybody together, we kind of, I think, had a collective feeling that let's go on offense. Let's find a way to innovate our way out of this mess and hopefully help the world along the way.
That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, there have been a few problems, a few adjustments, and, so far, a happy ending. The university made one big assumption that fueled all their modeling data. They predicted that when the students came back, 7,000 to 8,000 undergrads would go to parties 3 times a week without masks. They're young. They like to go out. The university gets that. But what they didn't foresee was a small group of students who, even after testing positive for the coronavirus, also went to parties, even hosted them. And that led to a higher infection rate than they expected. It rose to almost 3%, which was a little startling and completely unacceptable. But if Marty Burke has one motto, it's this.
We've always been fast, but we always want to be faster.
And everything about getting the infection rate down has to do with data and speed. Speed of testing, speed of results, speed of notification. So this is what the university did. They figured out that 95 to 98% of the COVID cases were among the undergrads, which meant that they could test the faculty less, going down to 1 time per week, and the high-risk students, those living in frats or dorms where there were breakouts, more often. up to 3 times a week. Another adjustment they made?
We've created a priority rack system. So when people come into our tent, as you hand in your vial or your tube, they'll now ask you, do you have any symptoms? Did you have a recent exposure? Or do you have any reason to think you might be, higher risk for COVID? And if your answer is yes, you put yours into a special high priority rack. And of course, we can then test those really fast.
And lastly, after they detect a positive test result, they have a notification team who alerts the positive person within, get this, 30 minutes. When Marty said they were fast, he wasn't kidding.
And I'm very excited to tell you that it worked. Okay, so now our last 7-day positivity rate is back down to 0.52%. And over the last 2 days, we've only had 10 and 17 cases per day.
Also exciting?
We never closed classes. Our mission, is to educate our students. And we're really proud that we did not have to shut down in-person instruction. I tell you, the most heartening thing is the people who were most upset was the overwhelming majority of students who don't want to go back to their parents' basement and try to learn on a computer. I mean, this is like they stood up and said, knock it off, right? Like we all want to stay here. And so very positive peer pressure, I think, became the driver.
There were a few suspensions as well. Nevertheless, the indomitable Marty Burke is even more optimistic now than when we talked to him 3 weeks ago, if that's even possible.
So I'm saying we're feeling very hopeful at this point. And I think the couple key messages, you won't be surprised, the students have to continue to do their part. We've seen what will happen if they don't. And so I think as strong as we can possibly send the message, we need to say, let's continue to work together. And we view this as a partnership. We know they're going to want to socialize, of course, right? We're not Pollyannish about this. We understand that. It's just a matter of helping them learn how to do that safely. So now we're entering a new phase. We're going to lock arms, do things differently together. And I am very, very hopeful that we're going to be here November 20th.
Dr. Martin Burke, official task force leader, unofficial COVID testing ambassador, and professor of chemistry at the University of Illinois, Urbana Champaign. The COVID testing and tracking program that we just talked about that the University of Illinois developed is called the SHIELD program. It's designed to keep the school and the greater Champaign community safe. Now the program has not only expanded to the University of Illinois Chicago and the University of Illinois Springfield, but they have a plan to bring this technology and organization out to the entire state. No easy task. It's almost like a military deployment. It has so many moving parts. Good thing Ron Watkins is a former Army captain. He's also the Associate Dean for Strategic Innovation at the U of I Gies College of Business. His job is to deploy the COVID tests statewide and make it as accessible as possible.
And so accessibility is being able to get the cost down as best we can and to be able to develop the capacity, the lab capabilities that are needed to do the testing.
First, he had to consider the differences in where and how the test will be used. U of I is an enclosed environment with the testing, lab, data flow, and the results all just ricocheting around the campus borders. Maybe 50,000 people using the testing protocol in one county. Illinois has 12.6 million people over 102 counties.
It's just a completely different environment and beast to work with.
It's a big challenge with 4 essential hurdles to get over, according to Watkins.
The supply chain, the technology, the lab builds, and the logistics piece. It's really how can we go faster? Because each week there is substantial impact. So when I see the coronavirus numbers come out, when I see whether it's the number of cases, the loss of life, or the fact that we're unable to open an economy fully, what keeps me up at night is really trying to figure out how do we do this quicker? How do we put a model in place? How do we get what we need at faster speeds?
Right now, Watkins thinks that realistically they're 12 to 16 weeks out. To be clear, Shield Illinois partners with sponsors who can help pay for the tests, community partners like employers and other universities that can help collect samples, and lab partners like schools of medicine that have the space for a lab and the staff for it. Watkins coordinates, plans, budgets, and lines everything up for someone else to use.
I think of it almost like we've got this wonderful recipe and this wonderful process. And so we're bringing that and the ingredients they need, the kitchen equipment they need, the supply chain they need, the technology they need. Now we need them to actually cook it.
And the need hardly stops at the Illinois border. But U of I has already thought that through with yet another initiative, Shield T3, which is ramping up to bring all this technology to all 50 states. But that is a story for another day. I'm already waiting on the sidewalk when Rebecca Singer pulls to the curb and parks her car.
The last time Deanna was here, my car got towed. And so she took me
We're both masked, ready to roll, and compulsively early. Her Toyota Matrix is loaded down with 3 plastic bins the size of coffee tables. We hoist them out of the car and roll them toward a transitional housing shelter for families experiencing homelessness. Inside the bins is everything she needs to set up a mobile COVID-19 testing site. The shelter is so unobtrusive and anonymous, it's hard to find. The address shows nothing but boarded-up windows. But around the corner, we find a grated door, and behind that, a clean, bright, welcoming space that looks like a converted apartment. Once introductions are made, Rebecca and a group of 4 or 5 nursing students start setting up their workspace.
Okay. Do you have any folding chairs at all? Yes. That would be fabulous if we could have 4 folding chairs.
They open a folding table, wipe it down, figure out where people will sit, where children may be most comfortable, and where they will administer the tests.
A typical day is organized chaos.
Anyone want a face shield?
We come with our PPE, our personal protective equipment, so gloves, gowns, masks, face shields, and then all the testing equipment, plus all the cleaning supplies that we would need to clean before and after testing.
This is the COVID Rapid Response Team. It's a collaboration between Rush Hospital, the Chicago Department of Public Health, and the University of Illinois, Chicago. The dynamic duo that head the effort are project lead Dr. Stockton Mayer, specialist in infectious disease at UIC, and Rebecca Singer, who's a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Population Health Nursing Science at UIC. Today they're joined by nursing students, but other times they work alongside a rotating group of pharmacy and medical students as well.
How's everyone doing today? End of the week? 2 weeks down in the semester? 13 more to go?
When the city of Chicago identifies an outbreak among people experiencing homelessness, this team dispatches to the shelter or encampment in question. But the testing is completely voluntary. I spoke with Rebecca Singer and Stockton Mayer in early September. She is a fast-moving bundle of energy with a shock of dark curly hair, and he, with his lanky build, blue scrubs, and surgical mask, bore a striking resemblance to Anthony Edwards from ER. They had been sent to the west side of Chicago. Here's Rebecca Singer.
And then in terms of the history of the outbreak, at this site, there was a resident that was diagnosed with COVID. And then in the organization, there was a staff member who had some level of contact with various both staff and residents at both sites, which is why we're testing both sites. We'll see how it goes. Any questions?
Project lead Dr. Stockton Mayer says that even though they come here to help the families and staff, it also works both ways.
I am constantly impressed by some of the staff at the facilities and the resilience of the residents. The staff, because, as I mentioned, they don't have any medical training, and they were dealing with a medical crisis. when a lot of them wanted to just not come in, they did. They realized that they needed to take care of folks. And that, I think, will always be one of the most lasting messages from this project. Just really seeing the community stand up, the bravery, the fearlessness, and really kind of confronting this. And it was, it inspired me, on a daily basis. And it was just incredibly touching.
This is Gwen, this is Naomi.
Okay, nice to meet you.
We do the very deep, brain touching swab, as people say. They're like, are you going to touch my brain? I'm like, no, the back of your throat. And then afterwards, they're like, that was my brain. And I'm like, well, not exactly, but sure. For me, I think it really symbolizes the loss of control and the loss of freedom that we've all felt during this time. And so the test is what sort of stands out, I think, as a real trigger for people. And so we always have that at front of mind when we're talking to people and when we're testing people, so that we can try to ease that anxiety for them.
Okay, and then your date of birth?
3/22/1972.
Have you been experiencing any new symptoms?
No.
So these symptoms include fever, chills, muscle aches, runny
In a
nose,
pandemic,
sore
the
throat,
good
cough,
relationships
shortness of
thrive,
breath,
and the bad relationships
vomiting,
really
headache,
don't
abdominal
thrive.
pain, diarrhea,
It really brings out the best and sometimes the worst in us. And it's been the same with our testing team. Everybody is on a first-name basis. Everyone is really there to help the community, and that is priority number one. And everyone realizes that. We have hard, long days sometimes, but we just enjoy being around each other and working with one another. And we don't really think about it. We're just kind of worried about getting the job done.
Perfect. So today we're going to do the oral and the nasal. We're going to just swab the back of your throat lightly, and then we'll go
Everyone is scared. It's scary right now. And to have those moments of connection where, you share a laugh, or you get through a hard moment, or in a time when we're not allowed to touch each other and you put a hand on someone's shoulder or hold their hand while you're testing them, it's really powerful, I think, for them and definitely for me.
I'm going to take a deep breath in on 3. So 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to enter just like that, okay? And I'll breathe with you, okay? You ready? 1, 2, 3, in. And release. One more time, in.
In a lot of ways, it emphasizes the connectedness between all of us. A transmissible disease doesn't really judge one person from the other. And a level of care needs to exist broadly across the population to keep everybody well.
After the swabs are taken, the tests take about a day or two to process. Then a nurse from the city delivers the results. People with positive results can be moved to a safe haven, a COVID-positive shelter with 24-hour nursing care provided by Rush Hospital. Or if it's possible for them to isolate at their shelter in individual rooms, they can stay put.
You got it? That was the quickest we ever did that.
Not long after all of the clipboards, gloves, face shields, and swabs are pulled out and set up, everything is gathered back up, packed into the big plastic bins, and rolled out to Rebecca's car. It was a quick turnaround because in the end, on the day that I was with the COVID rapid response team, only one person decided to test, which shines a bright light on one of the biggest problems healthcare workers face when it comes to testing for outbreaks of any virus, be it COVID, Ebola, SARS, or MERS, and that is patient fear. Fear that the test is painful, fear that the test will give them the virus, fear that their DNA is being stolen, and even fears that a microchip is being implanted into the patient during the test. And these fears are widespread. Standing outside the Chicago Center for Transitional Housing, Stockton Mayor and Rebecca Singer expressed their frustration.
It just points to the long-term structures and the way that the health system has failed our most at-risk communities and the communities of color. And so now we have a real crisis that is disproportionately impacting them. And we don't have any credit as a health system in order to actually do the right thing by these communities. And that makes fighting a pandemic really challenging.
I mean, you heard the same stories when Ebola was a big issue in Western Africa. A lot of when people would come in to try and do infection control measures, there was a lot of like, oh, well, you're actually coming here to give me the virus. It's the same thing here, And we think that, hey, this isn't going to happen in the United States, but we do. We see it, every single day, and this is just a great example of it.
But regardless of whether one person tests or 100 people test, Rebecca Singer and Stockton Mayor will be rolling out their bins somewhere else next week, wiping down surfaces, donning and doffing their PPE, swabbing, reassuring, and then packing it all up to do it again. And again. And again. While some UIC medical students may be rotating through the COVID rapid response team with Dr. Mayer and Rebecca Singer, others, like Anant Naik, third-year student at the Carle, Illinois College of Medicine, have different ways to contribute during the pandemic. For him, it all started with doodles.
So I'm a frequent doodler. I like to doodle stuff. I have a tablet, so I'm always trying to make art and illustrations and stuff. So I started just experimenting with this idea of writing a small poem with some illustrations. Nothing like significant. I wasn't planning on making it into a book at the time, but eventually the idea grew bigger, and I ended up writing parts of the poem to make it like a full book size piece, and then added a lot more illustrations to eventually publish it on my own.
The book is called Heroes of a Pandemic, Those Who Stood Up to COVID-19.
When I was writing this story poem, a lot of the news, it wasn't directed to explaining kids, what's going on, and it tried to create the poem in an easy to understand way, a way for parents as they're reading their kids this story to have a discussion about what is going on and have that conversation as a family. In a rural town of the Far East, there was a market with live animals and meat. This was also a teeny tiny pathogen's home, whose true power was yet unknown. The virus now settled in the mouth and lungs, duplicating itself, and soon there were tons. Now it had spread to the rest of the world. Borders shuttered, economies unfurled.
It was too late. The virus already had its way, and vulnerable people began to suffer night and day. But some brave people decided that the virus had had enough. Doctors, nurses, and scientists were far from giving up. Health officials, world leaders, police officers worked side by side to encourage citizens to wash their hands and stay inside.
The illustrations in some places are light and airy, and in others dark and moody, and that is by design.
This virus has really dramatically affected the way we live our life and has quite literally stolen some of the light in our life, sending us inside, making us feel alone. So I tried to, in some ways, depict that with the illustrations. And, and in some of the illustrations, it goes from a kind of a darker outside to a brighter interior where it's the people that I'm trying to highlight. And those are brighter because those are the heroes trying to bring back the light into the environment that we're in.
The war with this virus was fought not with guns and tanks. People died from an invisible enemy, not armies or gangs. The world recognized the glue that bound society tighter. These were the truckers, taxi drivers, grocery store employees, and firefighters. Our true superheroes saved the day. And if the virus would once again return,
we know they could quickly send it away.
That was Anant Naik, third-year medical student at Carle, Illinois College of Medicine in Urbana Champaign, reading Heroes of the Pandemic, Those Who Stood Up to COVID-19, a book he wrote and illustrated. Sales of the book have raised $3,000 for Doctors Without Borders. We also heard excerpts read by Zia Valdez, age 11. Rising to the Challenge was produced and engineered by Libby Foster, with editing help from Shana Roth. Special thanks to Tim Colleen, Moss Bresnahan, Lily Duncanson, Laura Clower, Robin Kaler, Kirsten Ruby, David Mercer, and Tom Hardy. Rising to the Challenge is a production of the University of Illinois System and Illinois Public Media. I'm Gwen Macsai. Thanks for listening.